A few icons we'll be using for our mobile application. So in this video, we'll create them using RGB swatches to give us more flexibility with our colors. We've also covered a lot of the techniques we'll be using for drawing artwork previously, but this video will give you more ideas for how to draw artwork inside of Illustrator. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of zoom in on the top of my artboard here, and I'm going to grab the line tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click and drag, and then I'll hold the shift key to make a perfectly horizontal line. And I want to add a stroke to that object. So what I'll do is I'm going to double click on the stroke indicator to bring up the color picker. And we're going to be using a green color here. So in the RGB fields, I'm going to type 156, 193, and 0. And we'll go ahead and click OK. And then in the stroke panel, we'll go ahead and increase the size of that. And what I'm creating here is a hamburger menu. So I'm going to actually turn on the round cap, and then we can make this as big as we want. I think I'm going to go with maybe 20 points. I think that looks pretty good. And then while I'm here, I'll open up the swatches panel, and I'm going to drag the stroke color, and I'm going to drop it in here. That way I have a swatch that I can use for the other elements. And if you want, we can double click on that swatch, and then in the swatch options, we're going to make sure we turn on global. So I'll call this mobile green. That looks good. And we'll go ahead and click OK. Now I can use that for my other elements. Now what I'm going to do is switch over to my selection tool. I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option key, and I'm going to drag down and then add the Shift key to make a copy of that item. And then I'm going to press Command D or Control D on my keyboard to repeat that. And that's going to give me the hamburger menu that I want to use. Now I'm going to select all of those items and just reposition it. You can even use your arrow keys to nudge it if you want to. And I'm just going to position that right there in the upper left corner. That looks pretty good. Now I'm going to move down to the bottom of my mobile app, and there's a couple of icons we're going to be using here. And the first thing I'm going to do is click and hold on my rectangle and grab the star tool. And if we want, we can kind of set this up in advance. I'm going to swap my stroke and fill color so that my fill color is going to be green. And now I'm going to go ahead and draw a star. And I want that to be about that big. I think that looks pretty good. And I'm using the technique, as I draw, I still have my mouse held down, and then I can add the spacebar on my keyboard to reposition it as I'm drawing. And that just gives me a lot of flexibility for how big I want it and where I want it to be. So I'm going to go ahead and let go. That looks pretty good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the ellipse tool. And what I'll do, I'm going to make sure that if I go to the View menu, I want to make sure that I have my Smart Guides turned on. There they are. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and drag to draw a perfect circle. And I don't want it to be quite as tall as the star, maybe about like this. And then what I'm going to do is using my pen tool, I'm going to hold down Alt or Option, and I'm going to click on the bottom anchor point. Then I'm going to hold down the Command or Control key, and I'm just going to drag that anchor point straight down to create kind of a, like a location symbol. That's what I see a lot being used to indicate a location. So that looks pretty good. And now we'll drag one more ellipse out. So I'm just going to kind of click and drag to draw another circle in the middle here. And if we select the two objects, I'll click on the original shape to make it the key object. And then in the Align panel, I'll align that to the center. So that looks pretty good. Now what I'll do is I'll go to the Object menu and choose Compound Path Make, and that'll punch the hole through that original shape. And that's looking pretty good, I think. So that gives me the location. Now I want to draw a heart, which we can use for like the favorites. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to use a little bit of trickery here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a square. So I'm just going to hold down the Shift key and draw a square. And then using the selection tool, I'm going to rotate it 45 degrees. So as I rotate, I'll hold down the Shift key to snap it. That looks pretty good. And I think that looks good. Let's actually rotate it. I actually want this to go No, that actually looks pretty good, but I'll move it up here. I think that looks good. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab another rectangle, and I'm going to overlap the top, because all I want is the bottom portion here. So I'm going to select those two objects. I'll grab the Shape Builder tool, and then I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option key and click on this guy and this guy so that I'm only left with that piece. Now, if you click on your pen tool, I'm now going to click right here to add an anchor point, and then I'm going to press the Delete key on my keyboard to delete it, and that's going to leave me with an open path. Now what that does for me, if I go back to my selection tool, I'm going to press Shift-X on my keyboard to swap the stroke and fill color. And I'm going to increase the weight of this. So I can kind of use, I'm actually hovering over the field and scrolling with my mouse to increase the weight. I'm going to turn on the round cap, and I'm actually going to make this really big because what I want to end up with is a heart shape. And that looks pretty good. I think I'm happy with that. And then I'll go to the object menu and choose expand and expand the fill and the stroke, and that leaves me with a overall shape. So it's kind of a nice little trick you can use. Now I'm going to utilize this. I'm going to go ahead and resize this to kind of match it up with my other elements. That looks pretty good. And now I'm going to create a plus sign over here. So using the rectangle tool, I'll just kind of click and drag from the top and go maybe about like that. I'm going to choose Edit Copy, Edit Paste in Front, and then using my selection tool, I'll just kind of rotate this 90 degrees, and that'll give me my plus sign. So with both of those pieces selected, I can use my Shape Builder tool and just merge these pieces together, and now I have one solid piece. Now the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a circle over here. And again, I'm trying to keep these around the same size. That looks pretty good. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my Type tool, and I'm just going to maybe click up here, and I'm going to type a lowercase I. And then I'll make that bigger so I can see what this looks like. And that actually looks pretty good. The font that I'm using for that is Myriad Pro. I think that's going to work. So I'll just select that with my selection tool and go to Type, Create Outlines, and then I can kind of move this down, and that'll become my info button, if you will. And if you want to, you can align those to one another. And that looks pretty good. And if you want to, we can select both of these, and I can go to Object, Compound Path Make, and that will punch the hole, through the middle there. So that this is looking pretty good. Now what I'll do is I'll move this guy all the way over here where I want it to appear, and I'm going to open my Align panel. Go to Window, Align, and I'm going to select all 5 of these objects. And what I'll do is let's go ahead and align them to their vertical center. And then what I'll do is down here under Distribute Objects, I'm going to distribute the center of the objects to space them out. And you could do that. Now you'll notice right now that they don't really look like they're equally spaced. And so if you click on this little arrow next to Align, you might have to do it twice. Instead of distributing the objects, I'm going to distribute the spacing. And you want to make sure that under Align To that you have Align to Selection chosen. And now when I do that, it distributes the space instead of the center of the objects because they're not all the same width. And if I zoom back out, I think that's starting to take shape. So that looks pretty good. So we'll go ahead and move forward with the other elements of the app. Before I do that, I'm just going to go ahead and save this, and I'll call this Mobile Mockup, and I'll just save that to a location of my choice. In my Illustrator options, I'll just go ahead and click OK, and now we're ready to move forward from here.